The Chaos Wonder. I've had the pleasure to play this build in the 2-week hardcore flashback race. And my goodness gracious me, it's been absolutely amazing. I've been crushing content and going at an incredible speed, clearing through content and maps. So how does this build work exactly? Well, the key behind this build is that we are using a one called Obliteration. Obliteration gives you a 20% chance that when you kill an enemy, they explode, dealing a quarter of their HP as chaos damage. Now, of course, we do wield these ones so that we have a 40% chance to do this explosion. And what's interesting about this explosion is that it can be scaled by things on your passive tree and your gear, not support gems. Support gems will not work, but they can be scaled by percentage chaos damage, area damage, AoE, etc. Now, what does this mean? You can scale the damage high enough that you can make the explosions kill all nearby enemies. And of course, when nearby enemies die, they have a chance to explode as well. So what does this mean? It creates a chain reaction effect where you can basically one-shot the entire screen. Hell, you can one-shot 2 or 3 screens sometimes. As long as the monsters are like all near each other, which by the way in maps happens quite a bit, everything just dies usually in one shot. It's a pretty incredible build, and I'm really enjoying just how fast I can clear. And of course, because it's like 90% chaos damage, you really don't need to care about Reflect at all. You can do Reflect map mods, and Reflect rares won't give you a problem at all. Chaos is pretty damn good. So one of the small things about this build though is that there is a small lag spike when you kill like 50 to 60 monsters all at once. Yeah, you're gonna need to deal with that, but that's just how it goes. Usually the lag spike means everything is dead, so it's not too bad. Now, how do we actually kill enemies and get this chaos explosion chain reaction to get going? Well, what we do is we use the skill Kinetic Blast, and we use it in conjunction with a lot of AoE nodes and 100% chance to pierce. We get 50% chance to pierce from the tree, and then we use the pierce support gem with Kinetic Blast, along with added chaos, greater multiple projectiles, and poison. As a 6th link, I would probably use Void Manipulation, though I haven't tested it myself. Now, why is 100% Pierce so good with Kinetic Blast? Well, every time Kinetic Blast pierces, it creates more additional small explosions. So if you hit a pack of like 20 mobs, and it pierces through like 15 of them, that's like the explosions of the Kinetic Blast times 15, which is just so much damage that everything dies in one shot. So it's pretty incredible. Now, some of you are going, well, we all know Kinetic Blast does amazing AoE damage, but how do you do single target? How do we solve that problem? Well, the answer is surprisingly pretty easy. What we do is we use a spell totem linked with Frost Wall, and ideally faster casting. Now, whenever Kinetic Blast pierces through Frost Wall, it creates the small explosions. It's basically like mimicking having monsters near a boss. So what you do is you slap the totem down right next to the boss, creates lots and lots of frost walls, and then you spam your Kinetic Blast, pierces through like 5 or 6 walls, and the boss can die pretty damn quickly. That being said, single target isn't as high as AoE clear in general, but that tends to be fine in PoE, which generally speaking we like to focus on as much AoE as possible. Now, what Ascendancy do we use in this class? There's 2 real options. There's Elementalist and there's Pathfinder. Now, I prefer personally to use Elementalist because it's just crazy ass damage, right? With the Elementalist Ascendancy, the most important points you're going to be taking is Shaper of Desolation and Beacon of Desolation. So what does Shaper of Desolation do? It allows all of your damage, including your chaos damage, to shock, ignite, and chill, which basically takes maybe one of the weaknesses of chaos damage, which it doesn't use elemental status proliferation effects, and adds it onto it, basically making your damage like the best possible damage ever. And Beacon of Desolation just allows this Shock, Chill, and Ignite to be proliferated in an AoE. Now basically this build is taking your AoE from your Chaos Explosions, and then it's adding on this AoE from Elementalist, and it's going, we just have so much AoE and so many effects going on, everything will just die. And as you can see, it tends to work out pretty damn well. So yeah, and remember, this build is Reflect immune, so you don't need to worry about Reflect at all. And yeah, it's pretty amazing. Now, Pathfinder tends to be a little bit less damage because you don't have Shaper of Desolation, but you get a lot more defense and a lot more powerful flasks, so it's still pretty damn good, especially if you have the Adziri's Promise Flask, which gives you like Leech and Chaos damage. So Pathfinder is definitely an excellent choice. Not one that I have tried out myself, but I've heard it's pretty good. Now, let's move on to some of the smaller details on the offensive part of this build. Because we kind of one-shot everything, I think the most important thing for this build to maximize clear speed is your movement speed, right? As long as you're moving fast, you can go from pack to pack, one-shotting everything, and that MS is so important because you don't have daggers, you cannot use whirling blades, so you just got to run the old-fashioned style. So how do we get as much speed as possible? Well, of course we're using 30% movement speed boots, and then we're going to be using a unique item called Devoto's Devotion. Well, anyway, Devoto's Devotion gives you an additional 20% movement speed, which really adds up over time and saves you a lot of time as you're moving around maps. On top of that, we use a Quicksilver over Adrenaline. You can kind of pick whatever mods you want, but basically the Adrenaline part is very important for additional movement speed. And then we use a Silver Flask, which gives another 20% increased movement speed and attack speed. And we can combine all of this with Vaal Haste, linked with increased duration, to move devilishly fast. And it really takes the build to the next level when you can fit on that Devoto's and that extra movement speed. Finally, you can't use this on all map mods, like no regen, it tends to be a bit too much, but on many maps we can use Blood Rage. Blood Rage is going to give us a bunch of frenzy charges and more attack speed as well, and those frenzy charges will increase the damage of our Chaos Explosions as well, so it really does give a lot of extra damage to the build. Now, onto the defense of this character. This character actually has quite a lot of layered defenses, and it's not as squishy as I initially thought it might be. The absolute cornerstone to your defense in higher end maps is going to be the Basalt Flask. Basalt Flask is incredible because it gives 20% physical reduction, and physical damage is usually the hardest thing to mitigate, and armor tends to not be very good against it, at least in the very high spike damage form. So Basalt Flask is absolutely incredible because it just works. It's just 20% physical damage reduction. We also get increased Flask effective nodes in the Witch Tree, so that 20% is actually slightly higher. And this turns out to be a big deal, and it really allows us to survive in maps. As long as we keep that flask up, we'll generally not die. It's basically lightning coil in a bottle. Now, on top of this, we also run Enfeebled Blasphemy, because Enfeebled Blasphemy is just great. We've got a lot of AoE from the tree, and if you're using Carcass Jack, that AoE is even greater. And this is going to allow us to just reduce the damage of monsters in general. Now, of course, some maps are curse immune. If you're going to do a curse immune map, I just recommend using something like Herald of Ash to give you more damage and Prolif. But basically, you know, like 80% of maps you can use it, and it's going to allow you to play more aggressively and just have a safer time in general. On top of this, we're using Arctic Armor. Arctic Armor is great because when we do attack, we have to stand still. So its mitigation effect will be applying, and the chill effect is fantastic. We're also going to be using a Stone Golem. A Stone Golem gives us a little bit of extra physical damage because of Liege of the Primordial from the Elementalist tree. It's not really a big deal, but hey. But the main thing about Stone Golem is it gives us incredible life regeneration, which just makes the mapping process easier and allows us not to lose HP while we're using Blood Rage. Now, if you feel like going for more damage at the loss of this regen and survivability, you could use a Chaos Golem. A Chaos Golem is going to give us a bit of physical damage reduction, which will stack quite nicely with the Basalt Flask. And on top of that, it's going to give us 40% increased Chaos damage, which again will scale our Chaos Explosions, damage, etc. Finally, we have two more layers. We have a cost from damage taken or Mortal Coil setup, of course, allows us to reduce spike physical damage. And finally, we have Acrobatics. Acrobatics just gives us a 30% chance to avoid attacks. It's really great, and just helps us not get mobbed by a large amount of enemies. Now, last note, I just want to talk about the added Chaos Gem. Because of the way this build works, and because we scale our damage primarily through flat Chaos damage, the added Chaos Gem is basically nearly all your damage, right? And it's incredibly important that you level this gem up as high as possible. I'm actually leveling up 6 additional added Chaos Gems so that when they all hit level 20, I'm going to mass Vaal Orb them and hope to get a level 21 for a huge DPS boost. Now, this gem isn't actually given as a quest reward. You need to buy this gem or find this gem. So it's very important you buy this gem as early as possible and start leveling it up from level 31 so it can be as high as possible when you switch to the Wonder build. You can't level it as this build. Honestly, I recommend you only switch over to this build when you hit Merciless Stride Lake. Until then, Wonders just don't tend to work very well. They have issues with single target and damage. So what I recommend is leveling with Bladefall or Blade Vortex or Firestorm, because all of those skills work very well with AoE and all the nodes you're getting, I particularly enjoyed Bladeful. I thought it was great, very safe, very powerful, and I used that all the way to Merciless Stride Lake, very fast, very smooth, and then I switched to Wonder for the amazing AoE clear. That's all from me. I hope you enjoyed this build introduction. This is Angryaa. Cheers.